I used to believe the cost of love was simply time. You marked the minutes with the flick of a wristwatch, the hours in the warmth of a kitchen, the years in the subtle changing of faces around the holiday table. But unremarkable Sunday in April, while I rinsed rice in a chipped blue colander and waited for the kettle to rattle, I was made to understand that someone, somewhere, had calculated a precise price for my love. It was not sentimental, and it was not cheap. Change the beneficiary on your life insurance to me, and you can see Caleb next weekend. Jenna. Before we continue, please subscribe. It helps this reach someone who needs it. The day had been thick with the usual quiet. I had sorted the week's pillbox and checked the perimeter for errant dandelions, then retreated to my small and spotless kitchen. The clouds had pressed low, a ceiling of wet wool, so I had the lights on early. My hands, raw in the joints but stubborn in their duty, measured out just enough for one. The water, when it boiled, hissed against the grains and set the air foggy and warm. I stood, counting the slow ascension of steam and listening to the faint grumble of the refrigerator, an appliance as old as my son. I thought of him, as I often did, and then of Caleb, my grandson, whose last drawing still hung above the stove, a smiling face with rocket arms, the colors feathered by heat and time. When the phone buzzed, I nearly let it go to voicemail. It vibrated in the cutlery drawer where I left it each night, out of habit and principle. And it was only because the sound startled the warblers from the feeder that I wiped my hands and retrieved it. The message, when I read it, was succinct. Clinical, almost. Change the beneficiary on your life insurance to me, and you can see Caleb next weekend. Jenna. My son was copied on the message. I noticed this second, only after the words had already burned themselves into the front of my mind. The phone, a gift from the family for my last birthday, so you won't get lost or die in a ditch, Jenna had said, half joking, was slick in my hand. The sensation was not lost on me. The rubbery give of the case, the sudden rush of heat in my fingertips. I read the text again. I read it a third time, my eyes finding the lines as if something in them might shift or dissolve with repetition. Change the beneficiary on your life insurance to me, and you can see Caleb next weekend, I imagined the unspoken preamble. Sorry for the imposition. Sorry for the directness. But these were absent. Only the transaction remained. The ultimatum, signed and sealed with a double tap of the thumb. Kyle's name beside Jenna's blinked at me in silent collusion. My son, a man with a kindly brow and a voice that could calm an angry child, had once built a paper rocket with me out of newspaper and packing tape. He had come to me for advice about raising Caleb, had cried into my shoulder on the day of his divorce, had begged me not to lose hope when his mother's health failed in spring. He had never, not once, asked for money. But here was his signature, an implicit endorsement. The next few minutes happened in sequence, but the details swim even now. I remember the rice scalding to the bottom of the pan. I remember the way my vision narrowed, like looking through the wrong end of a telescope. The birds outside resumed their squabbling, but their voices seemed far off, muffled by some barrier I could not name. It would be false to say I felt nothing. I felt a slow, icy dread, as if my veins had been rerouted with cold water. I felt, too, an odd sense of detachment, as if I were observing some other man in some other kitchen. Someone who could, perhaps, laugh it off or rage against the injustice. I did neither. I set the phone on the counter. I turned off the stove. I sat, not in my usual place, but in the hard-backed chair by the door, the one reserved for guests. I don't know how long I stayed there. The light through the window faded to a greasy dusk, and the shadows lengthened on the linoleum. I replayed the text in my mind, rolling it over and over, searching for the catch, the miscue, the hidden joke. There was none. The message was a contract, and the terms were clear. In that moment, I understood what it meant to be dispensable, to have one's value appraised, tallied, and exchanged. I felt something in me tilt, some internal ballast shifting permanently. I read the text again, and this time the words landed heavy, leaden, and irrevocable. They meant what they said. There was no going back. I was expected to comply. It is a strange thing to watch your life become a ledger. Even stranger to find the credits erased, the debts tallied in ink you cannot scrub away. In the weeks after my wife's diagnosis, I learned there are hospitals, and then there are hospitals. You come to know the difference by the quality of their silence and the scuff marks on the baseboards. The old county facility had a waiting area that smelled perpetually of burnt coffee and hospital soap, with brown vinyl seats so cracked they pinched the skin through your trousers. I grew familiar with the patterns of the linoleum there, a seam that ran from the nurse's desk to the window overlooking the parking lot, another that circled the bank of vending machines. There are patterns everywhere if you stay long enough. I always stayed. That habit was forged decades earlier at the plant. My hands, now gnarled and thick-knuckled, once snapped wire with a speed that impressed even the union reps. When they asked for overtime, I raised my hand first and last, volunteering for the Friday doubles and the Sunday shifts that paid a little extra. I learned quickly that if you showed up every day and made a fuss over nothing, they stopped noticing you at all, which was the best anyone could hope for in a factory run by men who measured worth by how little you complained. Back then, I thought love was something you built the way you assembled a line, piece by piece, repetition until the motion became muscle memory. I measured it in minutes of sleep foregone, and in the quiet pride of seeing my son's braces sparkle under the dentist's lights, even when we couldn't quite afford the upgrades. I saved the checks from those extra hours and used them to patch the roof, to buy Kyle his first real baseball glove, to make the Christmases less lean. I did not keep track because there was no point. The math was simple. If you gave everything, no one could say you failed. I was not perfect. There were times I could have been softer, times I let the exhaustion twist my words. The night before his big Little League game, I got called in on a 12-hour emergency, and when I came home, Kyle was already asleep, his bat by the door, a note beside it. We play tomorrow at 9. I set an alarm and arrived in time, but even now I remember the look he gave me from the dugout. A mixture of hope and skepticism, as if unsure whether I would stay the whole game. I did. He struck out twice and walked once. I cheered him anyway, my hands red from clapping. When my wife's illness came for us, I had little left to learn about loyalty. The first round of chemo left her with brittle nails and a scalp that itched so badly she would scrape until she bled. I found her once, in the half-light of the bathroom, picking at the little scabs along her temple. She smiled when she saw me in the mirror. "Don't look," she said. "I'm a sight." I stood behind her and rubbed her shoulders, felt the bird-like frailty that had replaced the woman I married. "I've seen worse," I said, and she laughed. And for a moment we were just ourselves, not patient and caretaker. I spooned soup into her mouth when the nausea permitted. I took her to every appointment, even the ones that ran long into the night and left us both exhausted. I did not itemize the hours or mourn the time lost. It was not a sacrifice, it was simply what you did. The days blurred. I could not tell you the exact date she stopped eating solids, only that I started buying more broth and less bread. I learned how to make soft-boiled eggs the way her mother used to, though I never quite managed the perfect wobble she remembered from childhood. I ironed her blouses even after she no longer wore them, folded them with a precision that felt like prayer. After she was gone, I kept up the rituals. I ate dinner alone and watched the news, pausing at the commercials because muting them felt like tempting fate. I visited her grave on the 1st of every month, pruning the grass around the stone and washing away the dust. On holidays, I brought whatever flowers were in season. The expense seemed small in comparison to what she'd left behind. Through it all, I kept up with the family. When Kyle needed a new roof, I signed the check. When he and Jenna hit a rough patch, I watched Caleb for a week and told them not to worry about the late-night pickups or the mess of toys left in every room. I did not expect gratitude. A father's love, I thought, was like wallpaper. You only notice it when it's gone. Looking back, I see how wrong I was. Maybe the measure of love is not what you give, but what you withhold when pressed. Maybe it is not the sacrifices made in secret, but the ledger you leave behind for others to audit. The message from Jenna did not just sting. It rewrote the history I had lived. The years of double shifts and casserole dinners, of birthday cards and quiet handoffs at the playground. Suddenly, these were not acts of affection, but lines in a budget. I wondered how long she had been running the numbers. I wondered if Kyle had ever bothered to look. In my old age, I have grown fond of spreadsheets. I track my medications, my utilities, the slow trickle of dividends from a pension that never kept pace with inflation. But there are some things you should never try to total, because the answer will always come up short. I read the message again. I remembered the day I signed the policy, the cheap pen that left a blue smear on the line beside my name. I had chosen Kyle as the beneficiary without hesitation. It had seemed the simplest thing, a promise that even in death I could still provide. Now that promise was a bargaining chip. The sum of my life, distilled to a number and leveraged for visitation rights. I could not decide whether to laugh or rage or weep. So I did what I always did. I sat down and I waited for the feeling to pass. It didn't. After the second or third reread, Jenna's message lost its digital crispness and began to bleed around the edges, as if the words themselves were embarrassed to be party to such a demand. The longer I stared, the more surreal it seemed. A simple swap, love for paperwork, grandson for a signature. The price of admission had been set, and Caleb was the ticket. I placed the phone face down on the laminate table and turned my attention to the plate in the sink, its residue a thin film of rice and butter. I scrubbed it with unnecessary force, the bristles of the brush squealing against the glaze. I set it in the drying rack, where it struck the rim of a mug and made a dull, ringing sound that lingered, strangely mournful. I leaned into that sound, let it echo. People think a beneficiary is a windfall, the lucky recipient of what's left over, as if life were an investment with a guaranteed return. In reality, it is a name you write on a form the day you hope never comes. I remembered signing the policy at the kitchen table, different house, different decade, while my wife folded laundry nearby. She'd looked over, her arms full of towels, and said, "You're making me the lucky winner?" I'd said, "It's a poor man's lottery." We both laughed. The thought of any of it being real seemed impossibly far off then. I wondered what she would have made of this. Her grandson, reduced to a bargaining chip, the family's future negotiated through threats and reply all. I tried to summon her voice, her cool logic and the arch of her brow, but all I could recall was the sound of her laughter on that long-ago night, high and bright and gone in a breath. I suppose even memories are subject to inflation. I rinsed the sink. I wiped down the counter, carefully corralling a line of stray crumbs into the palm of my hand. I surveyed the kitchen, spotless as always, and let the silence spread from room to room. With nothing left to clean, I paced the length of the hallway, flicked the light off and on, then returned to the table where the phone waited for my next move. The transaction was so bald, so naked in its calculation, that for a moment I doubted my own interpretation. Perhaps Jenna meant something else. Perhaps Kyle had not read the message, or had not understood the implication. I imagined the two of them in their own kitchen, phones held overhead while they microwaved dinner, debating whether to push send. I wondered who had spoken the words first, who had decided that this was the way things were done now. There was no answer, of course. The message stood as it was, the offer on the table. I could accept or refuse, but either way, the damage had been done. I went to the living room and sat in the recliner, the one that still held the shallow outline of my wife's shape. I closed my eyes and tried to picture Caleb, 6 years old, a mop of brown hair, a laugh that ran up and down the scale. The last time he visited, we had drawn spaceships on butcher paper, filling them with astronauts and impossible planets. I tried to remember the details, but what surfaced instead was the way he'd hugged me at the door, clinging like he did as a toddler, as if the world outside might swallow him whole. I opened my eyes. The room was growing dark, the only light a weak halo from the street lamp filtering through the drapes. I thought about all the forms I had filled, all the accounts opened and closed, all the fine print I never bothered to read. I thought about the absurdity of bartering for the company of a child, as if visitation were a parking pass you could validate with the right signature. In the end, I did nothing. I sat in the growing dusk, letting the loneliness settle in my chest like sediment, heavy and unmoving. I would not respond to the message, not tonight, and maybe not ever. Some offers are best left to rot in the inbox, their ugliness blunted only by silence. If there was a lesson to be learned, I did not want to know it. The next morning, I decided that if I could not have dignity, I would have documentation. I moved through the house with the deliberate aimlessness of a man who had spent too many years in process plants. Check, recheck, and if possible, triple check. My breakfast, a single hard-boiled egg sliced with military precision, left the plate almost as clean as it began. I stacked the dish on the drying rack, then sat at the table and powered on the laptop. The screen flickered to life, cold and clinical. The first thing I did was take a screenshot of Jenna's message, then another, to capture the thread in its entirety. I printed the images in black and white, the words flattening into a document that felt less like a threat and more like evidence. I placed the pages in a labeled folder, Family Matters, and tucked it into the bottom drawer of my file cabinet, alongside the rest of my carefully curated records. Taxes, birth certificates, old leases from apartments I barely remembered. The insurance file took up a full manila folder, 31 years thick. The earliest forms were still crisp, carbonless duplicates with my name in careful block letters. I flipped through the progression. Annual statements, rate increases, the occasional urgent notice in red ink. Each page was a fossil of some past version of myself, marked by address changes and the slow, inevitable reduction of beneficiaries. My wife's name was there, crossed out once in neat blue pen after her passing. Below it, written in my own hand, was my sister's name, Elaine Avery. Next to it, in parentheses, the word contingent. I'd never thought much about what contingent meant until that morning. Now it seemed a word worth savoring, a future that depended on the failure of another, a shadow appointment. As I sorted the papers, a note slipped out from between the pages. I recognized the handwriting instantly, my wife's, slanted and meticulous. Keep it simple, no drama. I smiled, despite myself. She'd been fond of small directives, reminders not to let the world become too complicated. I placed the note atop the stack, a paperweight for my own anxieties. At 9:10 a.m. sharp, I called North River Life. The automated voice menu was, as always, labyrinthine. I listened to the parade of options. Press 1 for claims, press 2 for billing, press 0 for a human being, and selected accordingly. When I finally reached a representative, Her voice was young and matter-of-fact. "North River Life, this is Crystal. How can I help you today?" I recited my policy number, the date it was issued, the names of my wife and sister. She asked for my mother's maiden name. I answered and waited. "How can I help you today, Mr. Avery?" I paused, then chose my words with care. "I received a request from a family member. They want me to change the beneficiary on my policy. I'm not sure I want to do that." She made an affirmative noise, barely a syllable. "Only the policyholder can make changes, sir." "Is there any way someone else could change it?" I asked. "Could my son or daughter-in-law call and impersonate me?" She laughed, a quick, nervous tick. "That's strictly against company policy. All changes require a signature and either a notary public or an in-person appointment at a branch." I scribbled her words on the back of an old grocery receipt. "And what if someone tries to pressure me?" I said. "Can I put a note on file? Something that says not to accept changes without me present?" "Absolutely," she replied, her tone suddenly more formal. "We have a process for that. It's called a coercion flag. We can add a password to your account, too." I considered this. "Do it," I said. "Please." She asked me to choose a password. I hesitated, then said, "Wallpaper." She confirmed, typed it in, and gave me a reference number. I thanked her and hung up. For a long while I sat with the phone pressed to my chin, as if waiting for a voice to emerge from the plastic. The house was quiet, except for the faint ticking of the clock above the stove. I let the stillness settle, breathing in slow and measured. I imagined Jenna and Kyle, already drawing up a plan for my compliance. Perhaps they expected a fight, or perhaps they had anticipated my capitulation. Either way, I felt oddly at peace. I had made my position clear, at least to the people who mattered. A faceless insurance rep, my late wife, and a folder full of evidence. I opened the laptop again, this time to draft an email. I addressed it to myself. The subject line, contingency. The body of the message was brief. Document everything. Don't let them rush you. Keep it simple. No drama. I sent it, then closed the lid. Outside, the clouds had begun to thin, a pale blue breaking through in strips. I took my coffee onto the porch and watched the sparrows, undeterred by the cold. I envied their single-mindedness, the way they pecked and darted and fought for every crumb. Inside, the phone sat on the table, the screen dark. I let it ring when Jenna called. I let it ring when Kyle tried, twice in quick succession. I did not answer. Not yet. Instead, I took the wife's note and taped it to the fridge where I would see it every day. I opened the file cabinet, placed the insurance folder in its slot, and shut the drawer with a soft click. If there was dignity to be found, it was in the details. By the following Tuesday, I had an appointment with an attorney whose name I'd found in the church bulletin wedged under my windshield wiper. Carla Nguyen, Elder Law, Family Disputes. Her office was a strip mall shoebox decorated with imitation ficus and a single humming air purifier. The waiting area smelled faintly of lemon pledge and old ink. At 1 p.m. sharp, Ms. Nguyen ushered me past a chipped partition to her desk, where a legal pad and a stack of blue folders waited, as if the entire day had been calibrated for my arrival. She wore a charcoal suit and oval glasses that magnified the intensity of her eyes. She greeted me by name, formal, unsmiling, and invited me to sit. "I understand you're being pressured to change your insurance beneficiary," she said. "How urgent is the situation?" "Not urgent. Just unpleasant," I replied. I handed her the folder I'd assembled, now thick with screenshots, phone records, and a typed summary of the previous week's events. She leafed through the materials with practiced efficiency, making notations in the margins and underlining the phrases she deemed essential. Ms. Nguyen was one of those people who filled the air with the gentle staccato of clicking pens and shuffling paper. She spoke in low, steady increments, as if she'd already considered all possible outcomes and was merely citing the most probable. "You understand," she said, "that technically you can make your account unchangeable except by in-person notarized request. You've already set up a password, and your call to the insurance company is logged. That's good, but these situations have a way of escalating." She placed the printout of Jenna's message on the desk between us, tapping the margin with her pen. "They're leveraging access to your grandson as a tool for coercion. That's documented now. We have options." She used the word "we" as if she and I were joint custodians of my own future. "I'd like to draft a letter," I said. "One for the insurance company and another for them. Just so everyone is clear about the rules." She nodded, typed a note on her keyboard, and pulled up a blank template. "This is the right move," she said. "We'll keep it simple and direct. If they persist, you'll have grounds for a no-contact stipulation, or at minimum, a formal mediation." The letter to North River Life was short and precise. No changes to be accepted without my personal presence and a notarized affidavit. All correspondence to be copied to legal counsel. The second letter, addressed to Jenna and Kyle, was firmer. "Any attempt to condition contact with my grandson on beneficiary changes or other financial actions will be considered coercion and will be documented for legal remedy." Ms. Nguyen's tone was clipped, but not cold. "You want to avoid escalation," she said, "but it's best to set expectations now. If they press the issue, we'll respond in writing. No phone calls, no surprises." She slid the drafts across the desk for my review. The words seemed alien and unfamiliar, as if belonging to someone else's dispute. I signed both letters, then watched as she placed them in envelopes, added the return receipt stickers, and stamped them with the practiced flourish of someone who'd done this 1,000 times before. "We'll also file a petition with the county clerk," she said. "A simple no-harassment stipulation, tied to any attempts at financial manipulation. That way, if they try to cut off access to your grandson, you'll have a record." I nodded. "Thank you." She softened, just for a moment. "Most people wait too long to document. You're doing the right thing. Move slow, speak plain, keep paper." She handed me a copy of each letter and my folder, now even more burdened with official printouts and stamped pages. I thanked her again and left the office, feeling a strange mixture of exhaustion and relief. The parking lot outside was bright, the light sharp enough to sting my eyes. I sat in the car for a moment, the folder propped on my lap, and stared at the sky. There was a strip of clear blue behind the clouds, a line so thin it was almost invisible. I thought about what it meant to draw lines, between family and finance, between affection and obligation. I wondered if the act of defending yourself always left you lonelier, or if it simply exposed the loneliness that was already there. The folder felt heavier with every passing minute. I clutched it to my chest as I drove home, the papers rustling softly, a chorus of my own small resistance. Back inside the house, I set the folder on the kitchen table and took out the letters, reading them once more just to be sure. The words still felt foreign, but they were mine now. For the rest of the afternoon, I sat by the window and watched the world unfold at its usual indifferent pace. Children rode bikes past the mailbox, their laughter untethered to any ledger or demand. The neighbor's dog barked at nothing, then stopped, as if remembering it had better things to do. When the sun finally dipped below the roofline, I brewed a cup of tea and watched the steam spiral upward, fragile but certain. I held the cup in both hands and allowed myself the luxury of being unbothered, if only for a single, silent hour. The letters sat on the table, a shield I hadn't known I needed. Move slow, speak plain, keep paper. I could do that. Subscribe and share one line you wish you'd heard earlier. Someone will borrow it. The summons went out Monday evening, a simple text to both Kyle and Jenna. Wednesday, 6 p.m., my house. Family meeting. I kept it short, knowing that anything longer would invite prevarication. They replied almost instantly, "We'll be there." I counted that as a win. On the appointed day, I cleaned the kitchen twice, rearranged the chairs around the table so they stood at symmetrical distances, and boiled a fresh pot of coffee. I set out a plate of butter cookies, store-bought, but in a glass dish. At 5:55, I positioned the documents in a neat line along the table's edge. Insurance confirmation, password acknowledgement, Ms. Nguyen's letter with her signature circled in blue pen. Most importantly, I set my phone, face up, in the center of the table. The recording app was open, the little red bar already ticking off seconds. I wanted everything on the record. At precisely 6:02, Kyle and Jenna arrived. They came together, but Jenna walked 2 steps ahead, a file folder clamped to her chest. Kyle trailed behind, hands buried in his jacket pockets, eyes on the tiles of my entryway. "Coffee?" I asked. I said it to both of them, but only Kyle responded. "I'll take a cup," he said. His voice was thinner than I remembered, and he glanced at the cookies but didn't reach for one. Jenna declined, shaking her head with a polite, sharp smile. I poured the coffee into the mug Caleb had painted last Christmas. Cobalt blue with erratic gold stars, the handle awkwardly lopsided. It made me smile every time I used it. I set the mug in front of Kyle, who seemed surprised by the gesture. Jenna sat across from me, placing her folder squarely on the table and aligning it with the placemat. "Shall we get to it?" she said. I took my seat, feeling the solidity of the chair beneath me, and folded my hands on the table. "I want to see my grandson," I said. "That is not a negotiation. That's the beginning and end of the discussion." Jenna's lips pursed. She opened her folder, but I raised a hand to stop her. "First," I said, "we're going to clear something up." I pushed the insurer's letter toward her. "No changes to my beneficiary unless I'm present, with a notary. There's a password on the account, and I've flagged for coercion." Jenna didn't blink. She read the letter, then the next, then slid them both back across the table as if returning unsatisfactory homework. "I'm not sure what you think this accomplishes," she said. Kyle, meanwhile, stared into the blue galaxy of his mug. Jenna's voice softened, but it was the soft of ice, not velvet. "Thomas, this isn't about denying you access. We just need some assurance that Caleb will be provided for. With the way things are in the world, can you blame us for wanting to—" She let the sentence hang, unfinished, its claws retracted but not sheathed. "Wanting to what?" I asked. "Blackmail a 70-year-old man for the sake of convenience?" Kyle winced, the motion small but definite. Jenna folded her hands. "We're not blackmailing anyone. We just thought you'd want to make things simpler for the family." "Nothing about this is simple," I replied. "And if you think I'll sign my life over in exchange for a weekend with my grandson, you've grossly misunderstood the man you married into." A brittle silence followed, broken only by the soft click of my phone's screen as it dimmed, then brightened. Jenna glanced at the device. "Are you recording this?" "Yes," I said, "for my own peace of mind." She shook her head, half amused, half exasperated. "You always were dramatic." I shrugged. "You always were transactional." Kyle looked up for the first time, his gaze flicking between us like a nervous referee. "Can we not do this?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. "Can we just figure out a way for Dad to see Caleb and not make it into a war?" Jenna's hand found his, covering it. "Of course," she said, "but there needs to be structure." Boundaries. I sipped my own coffee. letting the bitterness anchor me. I have no problem with boundaries, I said. What I have a problem with is being extorted. Jenna rolled her eyes but said nothing. Kyle looked back down at the mug. I slid Miss Nguyen's letter across the table. This is the legal position, I said. Any attempt to condition contact on financial action will be treated as coercion. If you cut off access to my grandson, we'll settle it in court. Otherwise, we can keep things civil. Jenna read the letter, her jaw tensing, as she reached the signature at the bottom. She looked up at me, expression hard to read. You went to a lawyer. I did, I said, and I'll keep going if I have to. Kyle rubbed his forehead. Dad, we don't want it to come to that. I almost believed him. Jenna closed her folder with a soft thud. So what's your proposal? I reached for the cookies, took one, and broke it in half. I set the pieces on a napkin, then placed the napkin in front of Kyle. My proposal, I said, is that we go back to the way things were. You bring Caleb by on weekends. I take him to the park or the museum or the zoo if he wants. If you want a written agreement, I'll sign one, provided it doesn't mention insurance or money or anything else unrelated to my relationship with my grandson. Jenna's fingers drummed on the folder. And if we refuse? I shrugged. Then you'll have to explain to Caleb why his grandfather isn't allowed to see him. You'll have to explain the paperwork, the threats, and the reason I keep every message you send. She studied me for a long time. I met her stare and didn't blink. Finally, she stood. We'll discuss it, she said, and we'll let you know. Kyle lingered. He looked at the mug, then at me. You could have just talked to us, he said. Did it have to be so official? I softened, just for a second. Some things are too important to trust to a handshake, son. You of all people should understand that. He nodded, not in agreement, but in resignation. They left without another word. The door closed, and the house was still. I cleaned up the table, stacking the paperwork into my folder and washing the coffee mugs by hand. I ran my finger over the painted stars, feeling the ridges where Caleb's brush had left too much paint. I dried the mug and set it on the windowsill, where the fading light caught the gold flecks and made them shimmer. I replayed the recording, just to be sure I hadn't imagined the whole thing. The voices sounded strange, distant, as if they belonged to strangers. I deleted the file. I didn't need it. The next day, there was no word from Jenna or Kyle. No texts, no calls. I spent the afternoon in the garden, trimming back the hydrangeas and listening for the phone that never rang. By evening, I realized I was waiting for a peace that would not come. That night, I ate dinner alone and watched the news. I tried to focus on the anchor's voice, but my mind kept drifting to the mug on the windowsill, its constellation of blue and gold staring back at me. It would be a long time before I saw Caleb again, and longer still before any of this felt like a victory. But for now, at least, the boundaries were clear. The world continued on, indifferent to my small victories. By Saturday morning, the only proof of the last week's drama was in my inbox, an email from the county court clerk, time-stamped 8:17 a.m., subject line, stipulation filed. I read it 3 times, half expecting the language to change with each pass. But it was simple. The stipulation had been entered, all parties notified. A second email, from North River Life, followed an hour later. This one was even colder, almost gleeful in its automation. Your request has been processed. Account flagged for potential coercion. No changes permitted without in-person appearance and government-issued ID. Thank you for being a valued customer. I found the phrase darkly funny, as if loyalty were measured by how hard you clung to your own irrelevance. The rest of the morning was spent puttering around the house, performing the rituals of a man who had nowhere urgent to be. I vacuumed the living room twice. I dusted the frames along the hallway, pausing at the photo of Kyle as a boy, hair sticking up in uneven spikes, grinning with the self-assurance of someone who had never been told no. I skipped the photos of the wedding. It was easier that way. Just after lunch, a new text arrived. "We can talk about visits. Sunday at 2? Jenna." The message was civil, almost gentle. I wondered if it cost her something to send it. I typed my reply with the same care I used on all legal documents. "Library atrium, supervised visit, 1 hour." I added, "I'll bring snacks and a new book about rockets." No reply came, but the confirmation bubble told me the message was seen. That was enough. The rest of Saturday passed with a weightless anticipation, the kind that hovered just behind the breastbone. I tried to distract myself by watching the news, but every anchor's smile seemed rehearsed, every story tinged with some small dread. I turned it off and went for a walk, counting the cracks in the sidewalk and cataloging the houses for sale. The neighborhood felt emptier than usual, or maybe I was just seeing it for what it was. That night, I set out the book I'd ordered for Caleb, a glossy hardcover about space missions, filled with photos of astronauts in silver suits and diagrams of rockets staged for liftoff. I packed a bag with his favorite crackers, a bottle of apple juice, and a new set of markers. I placed everything by the door, ready for the morning. I couldn't sleep, so I made a list of things to say if the meeting went poorly. I wrote them on a sheet of lined paper, then tore it up before bed. Sunday dawned gray and silent. I ate a slice of toast, drank my coffee, and tried to steady my nerves by reading the newspaper. The words barely registered. By 1:40, I was already in the car, parked outside the library with the engine off. I sat there for a while, watching families drift in and out of the building. Some of the children looked just like Caleb, skinny arms, mop of brown hair, faces animated with the urgency of small discoveries. I rehearsed how the meeting would go. Polite greeting, exchange of snacks, brief but heartfelt conversation, then a careful parting with promises to do this again soon. At 1:58, I went inside. The library atrium was quiet, the hush of pages turning and feet on carpet. I found a table near the windows, arranged the book and snacks, and waited. They arrived at exactly 2 o'clock. Caleb spotted me first, his face lighting up in a way I hadn't seen since before the phone calls and emails and letters. He ran over, nearly tripping on the leg of a chair, and hugged me hard around the waist. The force of it surprised me. "Grandpa," he said, "did you see the rocket on TV?" I laughed, a sound I'd forgotten I could make. "I did. I brought you a book about it." He beamed and sat beside me, already flipping through the pages. Jenna hovered nearby, her expression unreadable, but she didn't interrupt. I poured the juice into a plastic cup, handed him the crackers, and watched as he drew little spirals on the book's flyleaf with a marker. For the next hour, we talked about space and gravity, about planets with rings and moons made of ice. He asked questions I couldn't answer, and I promised to look them up for next time. Jenna checked her watch a few times, but otherwise left us alone. At 3 sharp, she approached. "Time's up," she said, voice low. Caleb stood, hugging the book to his chest. "Can we do this again?" he asked. "Of course," I said. "Next Sunday?" He looked at Jenna, who paused before nodding. "Next Sunday," she agreed. We walked to the parking lot together, a fragile ceasefire hanging between us. Caleb buckled himself into the car, still clutching the book. As they pulled away, he waved through the rear window until I was out of sight. I stood there for a while, savoring the small victory. It wasn't much, but it was something. A wedge of sunlight broke through the clouds, scattering light on the pavement. I walked home with the empty snack bag, my heart both lighter and heavier than before. When I got inside, I wrote the date and time in my calendar. Then I poured myself a glass of water, set the empty cup next to the mug on the windowsill, and stared at the two side by side. They didn't match, but together they made sense. I sat down at the kitchen table, opened the next week's pillbox, and counted out the days until Sunday. For the first time in a long time, the future didn't feel like a sentence, but a promise. This is what justice looked like. Not a showdown, not a speech, not even the satisfaction of seeing anyone learn a lesson. Justice, in the end, was a file full of policy notes and account holds, a string of numbers and passwords that only I could unlock. It was the silent confidence of knowing my signature could not be forced, only given. Sometimes I imagined the alternative, the grand gestures, the Hollywood moment where I storm into a courtroom and deliver a closing argument that makes my son and his wife weep with remorse. But the truth was quieter and, I think, more enduring. The notary's stamp on my paperwork, the official seal on the letter from Ms. Nguyen, these were the real closing arguments. Irrefutable, unglamorous, permanent. It became a ritual every week. I'd arrive at the library 10 minutes early and set up at the same table, placing a fresh juice box and the newest book in the center. Caleb always arrived bursting with stories. The supervised visits became less awkward, more like themselves again. The first few times, Jenna hovered at the periphery, making notes on her phone, but soon even she seemed to relax, joining our conversations about planets and dinosaurs and what makes a star super. After each visit, I'd log the details in a spiral notebook. Date, time, what we read, what we talked about. It wasn't for evidence anymore. It was for me. A living ledger of the hours that matter. At home, the kitchen was unchanged. I still misplaced my glasses 3 times a day. I still oversalted the pasta. The file cabinet filled with a few more folders, each labeled in bold Sharpie. Every once in a while, I'd open the drawer and thumb through the pages, comforted by the weight of them. The permanence. The calls from Jenna and Kyle dwindled, then stopped entirely. For a while, I wondered if I should reach out, try to mend what was left. But I remembered the advice from Miss Nguyen. Move slow, speak plain, keep paper. I decided there was nothing to be gained from reopening wounds that had already scabbed over. Some silences are the best protection. In the quiet hours, I often thought of my wife, her voice in the back of my head. Keep it simple. No drama. I tried to honor that, even if the world seemed determined to complicate everything. If I could go back and do it differently, I'm not sure I would. The world is not made for men like me, men who believe that love is its own argument, that trust is something you build with coffee and casserole and silent hours in hospital rooms. But I did what I could. I set the boundaries. I made it clear that some things, some people, cannot be bought. In the end, the only revenge I wanted was this: to sit across from my grandson at a battered wooden table, sharing juice and stories about the stars. To live in a house that no one could take from me. To wake up each morning and know without a doubt that I had kept my promise. That was enough. That was justice. And sometimes, on good days, it even felt like victory. If any of this rings true, subscribe and leave one sentence, the boundary you'll set this week.